there is a point where we need to be able to stand against the evils that are happening in the government. And I feel that for me, this is definitely that moment.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Freedom Feature. I'm your host, Barry Bussey. With me today, I have Marko Kolic. Marko comes to us from British Columbia. And Marko, it's great to have you on our program.
Thanks, Barry. Much appreciated, and I'm happy to be here.
Tell me, Marko, can you just share with our audience a little bit about your background?
Sure. I grew up, actually, I was born in France. I came to Canada at a young tender age of 4. Oh. And I grew up in a mostly English-speaking part of Canada, British Columbia. So I don't have a French accent, as you can hear, mais je peux toujours parler français.
Oh.
Alors, ça c'est bien. So I kept my French, and I'm a kind of a sneaky Frenchman, so to speak.
And well, let me just say that is so awesome. One of my life goals, I guess, especially as growing up in Canada, where French was prominent in every nick and corner, as it were, of every place that I've gone, and certainly in the media, I always wanted to learn French. I'm trying a little bit right now on Duolingo, but that's about as far as I'm getting.
Yeah, well, I did it the easy way. I was born into it and surrounded by it, and I spoke French with my mom and dad at home. And then wonderful. I spoke English when I went to school. I had 2 kindergarten classes when I was a kid, so which I didn't mind. It was actually kind of fun.
Okay. Yeah. Wow, that's great. So tell us, Marko, what about what is your career now?
So currently I'm working for Correctional Services Canada. I work in administration. I'm an admin assistant. Mostly dealing with records and that type of thing is my work. But we kind of shift around in the office depending on what the needs are. Right. And I started my work with the Federal Public Service in 2015. I initially started with Citizenship and Immigration, moved to the Immigration Refugee Board, and then from there moved to Corrections. So I've been kind of in the quasi-legal judicial areas of the Federal Public Service since 2015.
Wow, that's awesome. So did you take in your undergrad any kind of legal studies at all, or?
No, actually my undergrad was I got a BA in religion in 2005 from Canadian University College, which is now called Burman University. It's in Alberta, in Lacombe. And after that, I went, and in 2009 is when I got my Master's of Divinity from Andrews University Seminary, Theological Seminary.
Okay, so here it is. You served, you did studies then on religion, and you end up in correctional services.
Yeah. Well, sometimes the Lord takes you in a different way, and some things don't work out one way. So, you got to eat, so you have to work. And I have to take care of my wife, and you just sometimes, I don't know, God just leads in a certain direction, and here I am.
Okay. Yeah. So tell us, what was the experience like for you going through the COVID crisis, especially as a public servant?
Well, it was less than pleasant. I'll put it that way, especially towards the end of 2021. So initially, different places reacted to it differently because we're in corrections. We're kind of considered something of a first responder in a sense. Mm-hmm. And because we deal with people who may have some sensitivities to disease and that type of thing, we have to be careful in that kind of environment. So for us, it was taken very seriously, and everyone took it very seriously. And we had certain measures that started becoming to put in place. For example, there was at first mostly social distancing and hand washing, that type of thing. We would be careful with what we handled and make sure that it was clean, that type of thing. And then it went from there to having to wear the mask. And then it went from there to having to wear a mask and a face shield. And then, the face shield kind of dropped off. And then eventually we were heading into 2021 there in August, or I think it was July that it was announced. I don't remember if it was July or August that the federal government decided that everyone had to be forcibly tested and vaccinated. Yeah.
And so you decided not to be vaccinated, did you? Or?
Yes, that's correct. I decided two things. Number one, I was not going to be tested, and I was not going to be vaccinated. That neither one of those things were necessary for myself on a health level, and they were also infringement for myself on a religious level. So what had developed from within corrections. Now I can speak about corrections. I'm not sure how exactly it went out in other departments, but in corrections we had a form that was created and a link. We were sent in an email to sign up and give a declaration as to whether or not we were vaccinated and other information belonging to that, and if we wanted to claim a religious exemption or a religious accommodation. There were others. There was another section I think available that was other accommodations as well, such as medical, I think was also on there as well. And I elected, because of my beliefs and because of what I had studied and read and understood from scripture and science, that I was not going to be neither tested nor vaccinated. And I applied for a religious exemption or accommodation, and of course was denied and then put on leave without pay.
Okay, now this is interesting because here you have a situation where you've got an undergraduate degree in religion. You have a master's degree. You say you were at the seminary, so that leads
I got an MDiv.
An MDiv. So that's the pastoral route, right? That's the clergy route.
Yeah.
And even with that amount of education, so how long was your MDiv? How long did it take?
I started in 2006, ended in 2009. I think at the time it is 90 credits. So it is actually, it's broader based than even the masters. Now the masters are more focused. I think they were like 30, 32 credits, but they're focused very strictly in theology or something along the lines. Whereas the pastoral degree deals with also history and it's more like a broad spectrum rather than being deep, but we deal with a lot of different things. So everything from counseling to biblical hermeneutics and preaching.
Right. But the thing is that you spent 7 years of your life studying religion.
Yeah.
One would think that you have a pretty good understanding of what religious obligations you're committed to and that kind of thing. And you applied for this exemption, this religious exemption, and it was denied. Okay. So what happened after that?
Well, the process was that on the initial hearing with the head of the institution, which is the warden, with respects to my religious accommodation or my religious accommodation request, what happens first I was interviewed by my immediate supervisor and another officer, a federal public servant, and I'm not sure what department they were with per se, but they were both interviewing me about my faith. So they were asking more questions because I had already submitted a form. So I submitted the form. I said my piece on the form. I said my reasons why. Then I was interviewed again with my immediate supervisor and this other federal public servant. Then all of that in January of 2022, then I had the hearing with the warden, who nearly immediately denied my claim.
Did he give a reason, or she give a reason, or?
Yeah, basically, in essence, if I read my response, my written response was that basically my religious beliefs are not, they don't fall within they don't trigger a an on the employer a need for them to accommodate my beliefs.
What was the criteria they were looking for?
Well, I was never told what criteria that would be. In fact, I was told specifically I would not be told what the criteria are. So, in other words, you had to pass a test of which the bar is unknown.
That is absolutely amazing.
Yeah.
Um,
And
you
so,
know, yeah. So first of all, you know, one of the basic understandings when it comes to the law, um, especially when we're dealing with administrative decision making, which this is. In other words, administrative decision making are made by government actors, of which the warden would be, and so on, because they're representing government. They are the bureaucrats. In other words, they're the ones who where the rubber meets the road as far as
yeah,
government policy,
yeah,
and it's extremely important in the practice of law and administrative law that there's to be due process. And due process is okay, what is it you are being, normally, what is it you're being accused of? Like, what's the case you have to meet? What
yep,
what are the criteria? Make sure that you've got an impartial tribunal that's going to make a decision, that you're given proper notice, that all of those kinds of things. We call
exactly.
it there's procedural justice, but there's also this notion that you are able to come and be able to speak to what it is, what the criteria is that you need to meet, and because otherwise you're going in blind. It's just
And that was it. That's exactly it. Went in
hmm,
completely blind. There was no metric that was written out to say this and this and this would meet this criteria. There's
hmm,
nothing. It's purely subjective. Of
wow.
course, I was told that it's in consultation with agents of CBSA and agents of this part of the government because they wanted to all be consistent. Well, they were consistently mysterious.
And
And,
probably
and
consistently saying no.
yeah, that's exactly what I think was going on.
Okay,
And
so were there other people who at this particular moment, because we'll follow through the
mhm.
chronology to go with your experience, but at that particular moment, did you were there other people getting religious exemptions or requesting it and receiving exemptions that you're aware of?
I was not aware of anyone in my institution that had made any of those requests, and I was not aware of anyone that actually got one either.
Okay,
So it was
so you may have been a little bit of an outlier in your institution.
more than likely.
Yeah,
Yeah.
which is also reason historically, just so that you know, there's this concept in law known as the slippery slope argument. The idea is that if we allow this, then that means there's going to be a whole floodgate. The floodgate
Hmm.
argument, slippery slope. You're going to fall down the hill because there'll be a whole bunch more people that are going to want to do the same thing that you did. In other words, they'll
Right.
claim to be religious when they're really not religious. However, a guy who's done 7 years of religion and theological training and pastoral ministry training seems to fit a bill that maybe
You,
you'd be an outlier even in that respect.
well, you'd think that would that my commitment to the study of religious things,
Mm,
specifically of the Bible, as a Christian, a Protestant Christian, and that the fact that I'm a Protestant actually did come up somewhat because I was asked several times, well, what does your church believe? And I had to remind them I'm a Protestant.
mhm,
We do not have popes. We do not have men over our conscience, unlike Catholicism, which have men over your conscience. And so you cannot. And so to me, the whole process was people who are religiously illiterate I'll put it gently, who were
Mm-hmm.
religiously illiterate were judging my religious literacy, my religious convictions, my religious scruples, my religious knowledge, my religious commitment. And these people knew nothing, but yet they somehow felt adequate to be able to judge me in that particular situation, which I find insulting, to be honest with you. Now, I'm not saying that you have to have a PhD in order to have conviction. That's not what I'm saying.
Mm-hmm.
You can be a layman, and in a sense, I am a layman because I have the degrees, but I'm not actively working in a church per se.
Right.
But you can come to the same conclusion by your own study and conviction of Scripture.
Well, in fact, that's indeed part of the whole Protestant ethic, right? Or the philosophical position, theological position, right? We're all priesthood of believers, as they say. Okay, so now here's the interesting thing, because I've talked to a lot of Catholics as well. And, of course, within their faith, of course, they also have a very strong religious, conscientious convictions on things.
Sure.
And that there's a huge debate even within that community about this whole thing. But
I could imagine.
So here's the thing. What I find puzzling, that I've seen this like throughout all of the cases where government is asking individuals, what does your church say?
Yeah.
And that I find troubling for the very reason that you mentioned with respect to this understanding of your own religious, philosophical background based on Protestantism, i.e., it's the individual.
Yeah.
But in the law itself, very, very famous case out of Quebec known as the Amsterdam case made it very clear that the Supreme Court of Canada said, look, it matters not, and in that case, it was dealing with the Jewish community. It said, look, it doesn't matter what the rabbi says.
Right.
The question is, what does this person, what is the religious conviction of this person who's the subject of this case? What are their convictions? And that's what the charter protects.
Yeah.
And so it's very troubling when we've seen this throughout the entire government, the federal government, provincial governments. We're now seeing it in the universities. Right now is a big debate as the universities are gearing up for the students to come back. And in the province of Ontario, the university which is one of my alma mater, is it used to be known as University of Western Ontario, now known as Western University, is now requiring full masks and triple vax. In other words, you got to have your booster and so forth in order for the students to go on campus.
Yeah.
And but what I have seen with the universities, they'll always ask, okay, so what does your church say? And the human rights legislation, the human rights jurisprudence, in other words, decisions made by the judges over the years, have always had it that it is not what the church says, is what the individual is convicted on.
Yeah, and this is something that is the problem, is that government is looking at religion as if religion acts like the government.
Right.
So they're interpreting religious conviction through the lens of government, in which you do what they say. But this is not how it works within the Protestant ethic. And it just goes to show you, I think, how much the Protestant ethic and the Protestant understanding has actually been eroded in Canadian society at large, and in the government at large, that they are very unsympathetic to that idea.
Yeah, well, and I guess it goes to the, it also goes to, is like you said, it's a lack of awareness, no question about it, and a lack of empathy. I guess is
Yes.
the
Oh,
word I
very
was
much
looking
so.
for.
That's exactly what I went through, a lack of empathy, I would say.
Yeah, absolute lack of empathy. And I might add as well, for those of you who are watching this program, but even within the Enlightenment, the Enlightenment in many ways came as a result, or came at the end of a philosophical tradition after the Protestant Reformation, and we had this whole idea, the emphasis on science and trying to get to the truth of things and all of that, and avoid all superstition. But
Right.
but we also developed during that time, which was highly influenced still by religion, and a lot of people forget that. But if you look at a lot of the Enlightenment thinkers,
Mm-hmm.
including Voltaire, who was very critical of religion, but was nevertheless himself quite religious, as was, Sir Isaac Newton and all the
Yeah.
rest, the scientists. But there was this concept of individual freedom, like freedom of speech,
Mm-hmm.
was extremely important. Milton's beautiful work on that is still worth reading, and so we're living in a system of government, a system of political and social society that's been highly influenced by our religious past.
Yeah.
But we have all of these institutions, and yet those who are operating institutions have no knowledge of that, nor do they understand individuals who are still committed to these principles of freedom of speech, freedom of conscience, inviolability of the person, and so forth. And so that's very important. I'm sorry I'm going off on a rant on a few of these things, but I've been really poisoned
Yeah.
with a lot of this misinformation, which is a term that's gotten a lot of play recently,
Yeah.
and disinformation. And here we get it in our own government, and yet they're trying to be the arbiters of information, and they're now the arbiters of what's going to be an accepted religious exemption, or religious
Yeah.
reason to be exempted. Okay, so let's go back to your story, Marco.
Sure. Sure. So what happened after my initial request was denied from the warden, then it went to a grievance. So then there's
Mm.
a grievance process that goes through. So while I am under section, I think it's section 11, which is check off. So I'm technically working in a union environment,
Mhm.
but I myself have my union dues diverted to a charitable organization. And but even then, the union is technically the sole arbiter, or the sole what's the word I'm looking for? Anyways, the person that would speak on my behalf,
Okay.
so to speak.
Right,
Right?
right, because they are seized with your case because
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
absolutely.
So they actually were pretty good. They're actually supportive of my stance, and they went to bat for me and went through the grievance process with me. So there was an initial grievance, and that went to my immediate supervisor, which was denied, and then a second level grievance, which goes to the warden, who denied the original, which of course was denied.
Right.
And now it's gone up to another level, of which I haven't heard back yet. And I think, and I'm not sure exactly what's going on. And this process has taken time. And at each one of these processes, so these were not so much interviews as they were interrogations of my faith and practice.
Okay, so
So
okay, so let's have a look at that, because I think the public needs to be educated as to what people with religious convictions have had to face. When you say interrogated, what kind of questions are they asking you?
well, what they're asking very much, I would say, if you want to put it this way, intimate religious questions like, why do you believe this way? What do you have to back that up? Um, what about other people who believe differently? What makes your belief necessarily necessary? Things of that nature. And your question at the core of your being, in a sense, because as a Christian, as a Protestant Christian, Jesus Christ is why I'm here. So you're questioning my commitment to Christ. And it comes off as an interrogation. It's not an opportunity like a normal opportunity to witness. Someone asks you, "Hey, why do you believe in Jesus?" And you could say, "Oh, well, I believe in Jesus because of this and this and this." And it's,
Right,
this
right.
is
But
this is
I
like,
mean, we sorry to interrupt, but we would recognize, of course, that when you're in an adversarial process,
yeah,
there would be this energy towards asking questions. I guess the thing that gets me is that historically, and I've written a lot about this, is that we would normally, as long as you were sincerely committed to the belief, you would be accommodated. That's historically how it's been. But
exactly.
but this is going deeper than that. So
Oh yeah.
carry on.
So in essence, you are being challenged on a very intimate and fundamental level of your being, because our being is connected with worshiping God. And if we have an issue with something that we believe can disrupt, disconnect, change, alter, or pervert or injure our worship of God, we have to take that very seriously as Christians, because
Mm,
worship of God is life. We derive life from God. That is who gives us this life. That is who gives us knowledge and wisdom and understanding. That is who gives us food and shelter and clothing. And you know, we do not live apart from God. The modern society is very mechanistic. It believes that all this stuff runs on its own. It does not. You don't run on your own. I don't. Nothing runs on its own. If God stopped ceasing, if he stopped sustaining us, it would simply fall apart immediately.
mm,
And that's the thing with faith, and that's the thing with our life and walk with God, is that it is a constant drawing from Him. And as we, if there's something that interrupts that, we are in religious peril. We are in spiritual peril, which is worse than physical peril.
mm.
You know.
And it's interesting you should say that, because throughout history, and even going on today, we've got situations where individuals are being persecuted in other countries, even today, and they would
Hmm.
rather die than to violate their religious conviction. And that was the great learning of the Protestant experience, and it was a recognition that everyone had fundamental original freedoms that
Yeah.
didn't come from the state. But in actuality, the philosophical and moral understanding was that those rights came from God, or came from the higher being, as it were. But we have lost that, and that's why it seems more and more difficult for people of faith to be able to have their consciences accommodated. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. I would definitely say so. I'd echo that thought. In this particular situation,
Mhm.
the I felt that the government agents approached faith in a very mechanistic kind of way, and really without much sympathy for it at all.
Mhm.
And that was the issue. There was no real sympathy, no attempt to engage beyond kind of an adversarial uh, process. And I was not there was nothing done to accommodate me at all. Like, you couldn't work from home, you couldn't, well, maybe do this or that. The only accommodation that was allowed was to be, if I recall correctly, I would be allowed to go back to work. I would be tested every 3 times a week, and then at the end of the fourth week, if I still did not receive my vaccination, my COVID vaccination, then I would still be put on leave without pay. That's not an accommodation. And
Mm.
the reality of the situation is that the government has tried to coerce people at the end of a needle. It hasn't used a gun, it's used a needle. And it has attempted to starve people into submission. And that, to me, is a heinous human rights issue, and
Mhm.
and crime. And it not only that, but it is an affront to God.
Mm.
It is an affront to God.
It's it is an affront to God, and I would suggest it's an affront to our historical and common, up until now, understanding of basic human rights.
Yeah.
A lot of people make fun, I've heard, people making fun of the Nuremberg Code. The point of that whole code was that as a result of what happened in World War II, that surely no human being is to be forced or coerced or harassed into a medical procedure that they do not agree with.
Yeah.
And one would have thought that given the experiences of the 20th century, that we would never, ever have to face that again. And yet here we are.
Well, humans are notoriously short-sighted. We also have a very short memory. We don't learn well from history, and history teaches that we don't learn well from history. We often repeat it. And to be honest, in this whole situation, if you ever wanted to know what side of the Third Reich you would fall under, well, now you know. Now you know.
And that's a very sobering thought.
That's exactly the point. That's exactly the point, because in Germany at that time, what were they doing? They were doing those experiments on people. They were forcing people into horrendous, experiments, medical experiments. And here we are again, and it's not perceived in the same way because it looks so sanitized. Satan is intelligent. He's not going to do the same thing twice because he knows we're up to that last bit of foolishness. But now he's going to put it in a nicer bow and, make it in a nicer, it's going to taste nicer. It's going to smell nicer. It's in a new packaging. And it fools most people. Most people don't get it. They still get fooled. But the reality is that it's still the same thing. It's the spirit and the essence remains. And that is what people have not seen.
Okay. So now this is interesting because and this is why, for those of you who are watching, who are, you don't believe in God, you don't believe in any of this religious stuff, as you might say. But the point is this: look at the spirit of the thing. It is. I go back often to Alexander Solzhenitsyn, the great Russian dissident. And he talks about the situation where he got very angry at one of the guards who was beating another inmate, and he wanted to kill that guy. I mean, he was wanting to, but then he realized that the hatred he had in his heart was also the same hatred that the guard had in his heart towards that fellow inmate. And it was a realization that the line between good and evil runs through every single human heart. And I think, you hear other public commentators like Jordan Peterson and others who make references to the biblical stories that we have because they do have meaning in our culture, and they have continued to be our anchor, as it were, with respect to it gave us our moral compass, in other words. Right. And so the spirit of coercion, is a spirit that has been assigned in the biblical literature to the figure known as Satan or the devil. And whether you believe in that or not, the point of the matter is we're able to see the spirit between good and evil all around us. And so, Marko, as you're talking about this, and you mentioned the spirit, and that to me is extremely important. And the other thing about evil is that, and we've seen this, it's a common human experience that evil is often wrapped up as a good. And so one has to be very discerning, right?
Absolutely.
And that's where I think we here in Canada have taken a very benign approach towards government. Like it's, I was in a meeting the other night with, or in a discussion, an interview with a Romanian fellow who came over to Canada, and he was mentioning to me, and folks, you'll be able to see it on the other podcast, and I encourage you to look it up. It's a podcast in my interview with Dr. Emmanuel Baston, and who is a physician in Romania and wasn't able to practice here in Canada, but is now very much involved in the construction industry. But anyhow, he points out how different the mindset in Romania to the mindset here in Canada. And in Romania was the idea that they didn't believe the government. No one believed the government. Right. And most of the people who worked in government didn't believe in the government.
Yeah.
And here in Canada, everyone believes what the government says. Yeah. And not having that sense of loyal opposition. In other words, you got to hold people to account. We have lost that tradition in Canada. And I think, if anything, what we've experienced, it seems to me we have to wake up to that opposition. We cannot accept government at face value anymore.
Yeah, certainly. And I think perhaps part of that initial trust that we have in government is because much early on, our government was influenced by that Protestant ethic. And so there was some of that benign influence. And as it has progressed, however, as Revelation 13 says, the lamb horned beast will speak like a dragon. There is a turn. There is a spirit that profuses throughout government that eventually becomes very evil and very oppressive and very wicked. And as Christians, of all people, we should be the most aware, the most awake, and the most prepared to withstand those types of movements of government. I'm not talking about revolution. I'm not talking about violence, because, people like to put those words in the mouths of others, claiming that certain groups are violent revolutionaries or that type of thing. But there is a point where we need to be able to stand against the evils that are happening in the government. And I feel that for me, this is definitely that moment. It was that moment where I have an excellent record. I have no histories of discipline in my work. I work well with people. You can ask all of my coworkers. I work well with nearly 99.9% of them. And the ones I don't get along or agree with too well, I still work well with them anyway. I'm just appalled. I'm appalled that this situation has happened, and my work, even my just my day-to-day work, seemed to have meant nothing. At the beginning of the whole COVID thing, you're a first responder, you're a hero, you're a this, that, and the other thing. But as soon as a certain date happened, and you didn't get a certain injection, well, now you're treated like a disease. Your very religious scruples are questioned. Your own health has to be sacrificed for everyone else's feeling of safety. You are now nothing. You are now nothing. And all the hard work, all of the things that I've done to distinguish myself as a proper public servant, doing good work, filling out that paperwork, putting those records away, contacting the contractor, everything that I did that was right, now that means nothing. And that's a stab at people. I don't think people really don't understand. To those who have taken the injections and they say, oh, it's just it's just a shot, take it. They don't understand how those who have not wanted to take it have been treated. It's really criminal. It's been hard. I have to admit, it's been incredibly stressful. It's been very hard. It's financially devastating. It's only by God's grace that my wife and I were able to weather it. And part of the reason we were able to weather it is because we saw in 2020 what was coming. We knew it
Really?
was coming.
And
We
and
knew,
so
I knew it
so
was
so you
coming.
prepared by saving extra money kind of thing?
Yeah, we
Okay.
put things aside to help us to prepare. As the Bible says, the prudent man sees the evil and he hides himself, but the
Mm.
foolish goes on and is punished. And so that rang in my ears in 2020. And it's like, we need to get ready. Not only ready physically, we need to get ready spiritually, mentally, and emotionally, because this is going to be a battle and we don't know when this is going to end. We don't know. In Canada, these things have been paused. The vaccine mandates have been paused. I am nearly, if I was a betting man, I'm not, because I'm not going to gamble. But if I was to put a bet down, I would say that I'm sure within, I don't know, a few weeks, the government may announce vaccine mandates are going to have to come back because, I don't know, cases are going to be coming back up or some new disease is coming at us or something. I'm pretty sure that that's going to happen.
But what is fascinating as we go through this experience, this COVID experience, is that there are all kinds of voices out there that are, how can I say, that are quite sensational with respect um, to all of these theological positions
Right.
and all of that. But there's also other groups that have suddenly have come up, and it seems to me that what's happened is that Canada has lost its bearings. It has lost its moral framework. It has lost its national narrative.
Yeah.
Even the narrative that is within the anthem, the Canadian anthem, God keep our land glorious and free.
Yeah.
Just the narrative that we've all experienced in the past. And if you read Canadian history and all of the discussions, we knew that, for example, that Toronto was Toronto the Good, and so all of this to say, when I was up at the truckers convoy, for
Mm-hmm.
example, there was an African Canadian preacher that was there preaching on the side of the street, and he had a big crowd gathered around him. And
Right.
by the way, for those of you who have been convinced by mainstream media that the trucker convoy was a horrible event and it was very violent and all of that, let me tell you, that is not what I experienced when I was up there. It was very much a carnival, almost like a winterlude festival that Ottawa used to have pre-COVID times. But I remember the preacher. He was preaching about Lazarus, who was raised from the dead. And
Right.
in the Bible, there's a story of Jesus who befriended Mary and Martha, and they were sisters to Lazarus, and they called Jesus and wanted him to come, but he said no. He kind of delayed it a
He
bit.
delayed. Yeah.
He delayed it, and then he ended up coming. And when he came, Lazarus was already dead.
Mm-hmm.
And in Scripture, it says that Jesus called Lazarus forth. Lazarus, rise up.
Yeah.
And the African Canadian preacher was saying it's time for Canada to rise up, as it
Mm.
were, and to recognize what is going on in the country.
Yeah.
And I thought, as I'm there listening to him, and it's within the context of the trucker convoy, this idea of moving towards coercion, as government did as with the a vaccine mandate. Here was this preacher calling on the people of Canada that, hey, take a look around, see what's happening here. Is this the kind of Canada we want to live in? One of the things that I've often been really concerned with is that we are all gathered on this one piece of real estate we call Canada.
Yeah.
And we need to try to figure it out how we can live together. Because right now, what's happening is just creating huge amounts of division. And so people like yourself, Marko, is suffering as a result of this loss of the Canadian narrative, a loss of this moral compass. And as a result, you have to pay for it. So where is, you say the case now is before a tribunal?
Well, yeah. So what's happened so far is that as far as a grievance is concerned, because the mandates are suspended right now, people can technically go back to work. So now what's going on? Last thing I was told is that the union is seeking for damages for those that have experienced things like myself.
Okay.
I've also contacted and put in a human rights violation claim with the Human Rights Tribunal.
Okay.
And I haven't heard anything back from them. So it's they're taking quite a long time to take up the case. I haven't heard anything. I last emailed them just last week to say what's any updates, any movements, and I haven't heard back at all. So I don't know what's going on there. So that's where things lie. People think right now, okay, it's summer, we can walk around. Oh, this thing's over. It's not over by a long shot. It is not over, and it's not over for me. It's not over for me until I see justice or Jesus coming. It's one of the two. This is something that will last me forever. I have learned who can be trusted and who cannot. I have learned who is on your side and who isn't, and that will quickly. The support that you have on the one hand can quickly disappear as soon as a type of coercive spirit comes into your life like this. And it is hard to take. It's hard to take. It's not easy, but by God's grace, that's the whole point as Christians. By God's grace, we know we are living in a world of sin. We know that we're living in a world whose central power is a demon. The central power of the earth, of this world, is a demon. Yes, God rules, but he does not rule yet fully here, though he can overrule events for the good of his people and the righteousness of his cause and his name. But yet we are subject here to these movements, and we are going to suffer some things, and that are going to be not pleasant at all. But at the same time, I have seen the deliverance of God. God prepared myself and my wife, and I thank God for my wife. She was by my side the whole time. She was with me the whole time, even to the point, it's not just the vaccine mandate. It's being tested as well. Testing is, as I understand, testing is the tip of the COVID spear. If you stop testing, the whole thing disappears. The whole house of cards falls apart. It's part of that narrative. It upholds it. And once you deal with that, because testing is completely irrelevant. If you happen to have a particle of a virus, it doesn't mean you're sick. It only means you have a particle of a virus. My understanding is that the human body contains, on average, about 3 to 5 pounds worth of bacteria, fungus, and viruses. Well, if the presence of any one of those things means you're ill, well, then we're all sick. We should all be dead. Somehow we're not. And so it's an affront. This whole system is an affront on a scientific basis, on a moral basis, on a spiritual basis. It's a complete affront to any form of reason and reasonableness. It makes us believe in absurdities. And if we begin to believe in absurdities, we commit atrocities. And that is the problem.
Yeah, it's, there's a huge debate going on right now in society that we're all engaged in. And we have to use our own intuition and faculty of reason to be able to discern what is right, what is wrong with respect to this. And of course, it takes a lot of energy, as you
Yeah.
mentioned, right? I mean,
Yeah.
it takes a lot of study, a lot of personal.
It does. It does. It takes personal study. It takes personal energy. It takes um, a kind of doggedness in searching for what is right, because you really have to wade through a mass of things. So there's very little middle ground in what you believe in this issue. You either support it or you don't. You have facts that say to one side or the other, and you have to go down this road and you have to choose a side. And we have to be careful as Christians, because the track of lies lies close to the track of truth.
Well, that makes a lie even more powerful when it is close.
And I'm not saying it's not a powerful lie. This has been a powerful lie. This has been a powerful lie, as we can see the results. We can see the results of how many people believe the lie, or even if they don't believe it, they go along with it. And like Luther said, it is neither safe nor right. I think I'm paraphrasing a little bit what he said, to go against one's conscience. And that's one thing I couldn't do in this situation. This was a moment for me that's it. And
it became a hill to die on, as it were.
Thankfully, I didn't die on it, but yes, in essence, yes, because I know, and it seems like a small thing to people, but the Bible shows us that God often does not test us with big things. He tests us with small things. What is apparently a small thing. It's just this is a path to hell, to put it bluntly. It's just put your thing in that slot. It's just this. It's just this. It's just this. And finally you find yourself just on the path to destruction. You know, that mentality, and that's part of the narrative, the very pro-COVID narrative, if I'm going to put it that way. It's just a shot. What do you mean it's just a shot? Do you know what that means, what that entails? What is in that shot? What are the particles of the shot? What are the long-term results of taking the shot? What happens if you take more than one shot? You know, they don't take it from A to B. They just say, oh, it's just a shot, as if it's just drinking a glass of water. Well, to some people, drinking a glass of water can kill them. So, you know, and I made the point. That, let's say the government decided to say everyone in Canada has to take a low dose aspirin every day. Low dose aspirin. Well, that might be okay for 90% of the population, but you're going to kill people and you're going to injure people just doing that. And to think that this shot is not going to have some ramification, and it's as if this thing is magic. People, it's completely safe and completely effective. It's a miracle, in fact. It's a miracle that this shot has been, you know, it's so miraculous that you will never be hurt by this. There's no cognition that is happening. There's no thinking about in the Canadian public about this could possibly be dangerous, just like any other type of drug, just like any other type of medical procedure. Suddenly, with this, there are no risks. And then people are castigated for taking something that obviously doesn't have any risks. Why are you not taking this thing that doesn't have any risk? What, are you stupid? No, it's not because I'm stupid. It's because I know that anything has risks. And it's up to me to accept the risk or not. And in Canada and in many other countries, you are told to accept a medical risk on behalf of someone else. Insanity. That's not practicing medicine. That's practicing religion.
Isn't that interesting? You know what? I was going to end the program, but I'm not going to end the program right now, because you just opened up something that, okay, you've studied religion, obviously, for a long time.
Yeah.
What are the aspects of this COVID experience that you see as being religious? Because I tell you, I had a I had a friend say to me the other day that he said, I feel like in many ways, those who have been accepting the narrative, the COVID narrative, that it is religious for them. So can you unpack that for me? What does that mean to you?
Sure. So from the way that I see it, having studied religion, the forms of religion, and how religion operates, is that religion has, just about any religion, has set laws, taboos, rituals, and those that are in authority with respects to those laws, rituals, and taboos. So what we have is the very same thing, and they cannot be questioned. And that's the other thing. For most religions, they cannot be questioned. Unlike the Bible, in which God says himself, let us reason together. So God invites investigation. So Protestant ethic invites investigation. But you will find that that is not the case in most other religious systems. Most other religious systems are very authoritarian. And we find a connection here in the COVID narrative that those who don't take a medical procedure are now evil. They're evil. They don't care about your grandmother. They're out to kill you just by refusing to take this life-saving medication. From what they say, they are doggedly persistent in expressing their faith. If you don't show reverence for the face mask, you are castigated for being a breaker of the law. Yet there's no real reason to wear such a thing on your face. It cannot prevent you from getting anything at all.
And of course, many people debate that, but that's
right.
We're not going to debate it here, but we're looking at religion. Yep.
Right. So the religious aspect of that is the fervency and the vehemence with which people will enforce not just their own conviction, but their conviction on you. You know, it is a rabid form of conviction. It is, in fact, people must conform to this new social norm.
So it's proselytization.
Yeah, ostracized, and you're financially penalized. You can be ostracized within your family. You can be denied medical. It forces people into a one-way only ideology, and it is highly emotive. It hits your emotions. It hits your cognitive ability. It hits your actions, and that is a form of religion. It espouses, and it has its own special high priests, the experts, the blessed experts, Fauci, or Anthony the Science Fauci, as he referred to himself, and castigate or in disagreeing with him, you're disagreeing with science. You're disagreeing with the whole realm of science if you disagree with him. He's like a pope. This is so religious. It has every mark of a religion, and you know what? I want to give people their religious freedom. If you want to believe in this religion, by all means, I would not stop you. I would like to enter into dialogue with those who believe this religion, but they will not give me the same courtesy.
Well, and I guess here's why it becomes so powerful, as it were, because on the one hand, you got if I take what you say, that there's a religious fervor.
Oh yeah.
Which I will have to admit that looks like an awful lot of religious fervor. And this religious fervor is going to save you. In other words, if you take this medicine, if you take this vaccine, it's going to save you. Then we must do everything we can to save you.
Yeah. And this is the thing. They have, in this religion, it has a very definite definition of sin. Okay. It has a definition of sin. And sin is not taking the shot, not wearing the item of clothing on your face, not acting in a certain way. And if you break these laws, which are immutable, you are now a pariah. You do not belong to the group anymore. And the group is able to castigate you, say all kinds of evil things against you, prevent you from having a job and entering into any kind of social contract whatsoever. You are now socially outcast, and anyone has the authority to do that to you. So can you imagine you're with your doctor and your doctor is telling you, well, okay, you're suffering from this and I'm going to prescribe this. And Justin Trudeau walks into the office and says, I want you to prescribe this as well. This is essentially what has happened. And not only can he do that, but every Joe Blow off the street can come into that office and say, hey, you're not wearing that thing. You haven't taken this injection. You need to do that right now. Suddenly, people have the power to enforce this religious dogma because you've broken these sinful laws. They have that power. And it's incredible to see what has happened. This is absolutely, as far as I'm concerned, and this is a competing religion. I am a Seventh-day Adventist. I am a Protestant. I have my religious convictions and belief. Others are free to have their religious convictions and belief. I welcome that, but you should not be allowed to focus or to force that religious conviction and belief, even under the name of science, so-called. Because it's just an excuse. They've just slapped the word science on it, and now suddenly, oh, people have to accept it. Science can be a religion too.
Yeah, it's interesting because I've read a lot of discussions about science. Most of my education has been in law and political science. By the way, I did do some religion way back in my undergrad, but the fact is that from my reading of science, of scientists, and more of a biographical, yes, I've taken some courses, but it's always been that there's always been big debates in science.
Sure.
I mean, many different schools of science. And there has always been this struggle back and forth. But I think in the modern times, science has become hijacked, it seems to me, by money interests. And in particular, I'm thinking of back in the 60s, 70s, there was a big debate about fat and sugar. Right. And whether or not sugar is the culprit or fat is the culprit when it comes to heart disease and so forth,
diabetes, and other things of that nature.
Yeah. And so what happened is that the big money interest in sugar would pay for the scientists, the physicians, the people doing studies, and lo and behold, their studies said, well, it's not sugar, it's fat. And I remember studying how there was a scientist in Great Britain, where he, through his scientific studies, found, and he, of course, not being paid by the sugar industry, came and said, well, no, it's it's sugar. Sugar is a big concern, and we need to be very mindful of sugar for people's health. And he was castigated. He was the pariah, and he passed away without vindication. And since his death, he, of course, has been vindicated. And it just strikes me that in many ways, it is the influence of money that's come into science that's creating this thing. And of course, we also saw that even in historical religion, right? Like when power and money comes into play, all religious groups have been known to be corrupted in one way or another. And that's what we seem to be having now.
Yeah, I think so. Humans are humans, whether they're religious or not. And in a sense, we all have a common humanity and common failures as a species, as a race. And part of it is our short-sightedness. Part of it is our ability to fall under greed and avarice. And these things cloud these are the devil's tools, so to speak, to cloud truth, whether it's found in science or religion.
Mm-hmm.
Because truth is truth. Truth is truth, the God of truth. And if it is true, then it's true. Then that's it. But that idea that something can be true apart from, your truth, my truth, the personal idea of truth is what's happening now. And yet at the same time, there is this narrative in which scientists are now the official voice of the world, an official voice of every aspect of life, and nothing outside of science really matters. Well, can you measure love in a beaker? Can you show me compassion by taking out the microscope? There's aspects of human life and experience that go beyond the material. And I think that our society as Canadians, we have lost again where God fits in that, where faith fits in that. And this has allowed science to be hijacked. Science is a tool. It's like a fork. Saying I believe in science is saying like I believe in forks. I don't believe in forks. I use forks. It is a tool by which we can use to interpret the world around us. And yet people here are taking that tool and making it into a faith. And I think it has definitely spilled over into the COVID narrative, that science in some ways is deified. Scientism, the belief in science, the belief that science has all the answers, the belief that science can delve into all mysteries, has definitely dovetailed into why people are so willing to listen to so-called experts and throw their mind and their will right out the window. And I have to say this too, is that it doesn't take a scientific degree to understand what's right in this situation. It doesn't take a theological degree. We can ask simple questions. You mentioned before about the Canadian idea of how much we trust the government. Well, let's be honest here. When the government was willing to offer, as some did, $1 million lotteries for school, for scholarships, they're willing to offer $1 million scholarships as a lottery if you take a shot. Some establishments, big businesses, is willing to give you free pizza, free donuts, free beer, free food, free whatever, free tickets to something if you take a shot. Begin to ask the question, at what point has this ever happened? And that should start ringing bells of alarm in your mind. It just takes scruples. It just takes basic scruples to understand that there is something amiss here. There's something wrong and it needs to be investigated. But even that, to the general public, seems to have just gone right out the window. The basic ability to question motive of why suddenly something is being done in a certain way. And again, it's a type of religion that has just swept over the minds. It's all the rage. It's all the rage. But I think in, like I said before, that God has allowed this for a reason. He has allowed this for people to understand where they're at. He has allowed this to show people what is the true nature of our reality, where we're actually heading, what God is actually warning us about in Scripture is coming to pass. It is a flare. It is a warning flare. This has been a warning flare, and for some of us, it's still ongoing. But it is a warning flare for us to become religiously, mentally, and spiritually prepared for what is about to come on this earth. Because we are dealing in Canada not only with these COVID mandates, but we're dealing with possible food shortages, and there's many other things that are dovetailing together into an event. The Bible says men's hearts failing them for fear of the things coming upon the earth. That's people dropping dead from heart attacks. They're so afraid. I mean, strangely enough, people have been dropping dead of heart attacks for fear of a disease for which they took a cure or a preventative, which it seems to be causing some of those heart attacks. So there's lots of things happening right now in Canada.
Yeah, and literally around the world.
Yeah.
And Marko, I want to thank you so much for your time, which has been very generous. I appreciate it, and I appreciate what you've had to share in your experience, and I hope things work out for you. The experience that I have seen so far has not been all that positive. However, I did come across some court cases over the last couple of weeks where judges are now asking some very serious questions.
Oh, thank God for
one
that.
judge recently stated here in the province of Ontario, basically, like, since when have we not been allowed to ask questions?
Yeah.
And it's so great. It actually makes my little bit of hair stand up straight because of excitement, because of the fact that, yes, we are now starting to see some brave judges begin to say, hey, what's going on here? And I think as time goes on, as we see the ongoing debates, and one of the things we've seen in science, I mentioned it earlier, is the fact that we've always had this ongoing debates. One scientific community has one opinion, one has the other, but now we got government choosing one opinion and then running with it. And so that's why we're in the mess we're in, it seems to me. Is there any final word that you would like to share with us?
Yeah, I would like to say this. Throughout this whole experience, though it has been incredibly difficult, trying, it has been very stressful. I want to say that God has brought me through it. God has brought me and my wife through it. God will continue to bring me through it. And I know that He is faithful that promised. And if all the Christians, I just want to give you hope. If you're in the same situation or in another situation, but in a similar vein, I want you to know that God is listening. He cares, and He will be by your side, and He will help you.
Great. I want to thank you so much for being here with us.
Oh, you're very welcome. God bless.
And I want to thank you, our listeners and viewers, who have been with us over this last hour or so as we've been discussing about the experience of Marko and his family with respect to the vaccine mandate and how difficult it has been and the struggle that he's been gone through, but yet his faith is holding him firm. Now, you may not agree with what Marko has shared. You may not agree with what I share from time to time, and that's okay. Because here at First Freedoms, we are wanting to encourage open, transparent, and honest dialogue. That means we allow our guests to be able to speak their minds and to be able to share their thoughts. And I thank you for listening and being part of this conversation. And until next time, I'm Barry Bussey. The fight for freedom consists not only in the legal battles in court, but also in the battle of ideas at the universities and in the media. It takes time, effort, and money to keep on top of the debates for freedom. Your donation allows us to keep fighting for all Canadians by giving at firstfreedoms.ca.